My brothers, you've all heard the phrase, she was a nightmare dressed as a daydream. You know, the thing about bad experiences with women is hindsight's always 2020. And a lot of guys still don't learn from those experiences. So the reason why I hopped on a call with Shawn to do this Skype interview is this book is really good. The Tactical Guide to Women, it's called How Men Can Manage Risk in Dating and Marriage. And it really helps you do things like identify good women of low drama and higher character versus those train wrecks that can really ruin your life. I hope you enjoyed the interview. Leave some comments below if you did, if you have any questions or special requests in the future. Link to the book is in the description from Amazon. You can buy it today. It just became available. Hope you enjoy this. All right. What is up, my brothers from another mother and those few rational sisters that watch this channel? I'm on today with Shawn Smith, who's a clinical psychologist from Denver, Colorado, and he was cool enough to send me a pre-release copy of his book titled The Tactical Guide to Women, How Men Can Manage Risk in Dating and Marriage. I'll just put it up there so you can take a quick peek. In the description below, I'll link to the book if you want to grab a copy off Amazon. It just went live today. In fairness, I've gone through about half of the book. I loved it, and I reached out to Shawn after he sent it to me and asked him to do an interview so I can share it with you guys. So this is a bit of a book review. What I've asked him to do is kind of give us a bit of a background story, because from what I gathered from the book, you're a clinical psychologist, you deal with a lot of relationship stuff, marriage counseling, relationship counseling. I know from what I've gathered in here, you've dealt with a lot of people post-divorce and kind of understanding why they end up with these difficult scenarios that they choose to fight through, and maybe reasons why you may not want to do it. You know, you can, well, basically, I'll let you do the origin story, but it's let's choose women better. Like, let's be more conscious about choosing the right partner if you're going to bring them into your life on a longer term basis. So, Shawn, origin story, why did you write this book?
Well, this book started probably 40 years ago. I grew up in my father's bar, and that set me on my course in a lot of ways. It got me interested in psychology. But one of the experiences I had there was looking around these adults around me and seeing these horrible relationship decisions they were making. And I didn't really understand it, but I knew that I would see guys crying into their beer at midnight over these women who had, just devastated them. And I vowed at a pretty early age that I was not going to get into the wrong relationship and have my life ruined. And more importantly, I learned pretty quickly that I can learn from other people's mistakes. And so I've been gathering people's mistakes for 40 years now. And yeah, I'm a psychologist, so that's my origin story. But the origin story for the book, there's really hundreds of origin stories for this book. And there's one in particular. There's a guy named Dave. He was in his mid-30s, and he had done very well for himself. He'd set up this business that sort of operated on its own, and it maintained him. And he was never going to be rich off of this business, but he was probably always going to be comfortable. And so he decided that it was time to bring a woman into his life, because that had always been very important to him, and he dated around a little bit. He personally had not had the best role model, so he was sort of at a handicap in choosing the right woman. But he met Lisa, and they were like peas and carrots right off the bat. And so within 6 months, he made this mistake that so many guys make. He moved her into his house without, 6 months is not enough time. And actually, I want to come back to that number later.
Mm-hmm.
And within 9 months, because she had been sort of struggling with her professional life, he was helping her get started in a business similar to his. And so at 9 months already, with this woman that he didn't know very well, he had his house mingled with her, and he had his business mingled with her, because she had sort of gotten some tendrils into his professional life.
Smart woman.
Yeah, well, he, after a year or so, around the year mark, he started to notice some things about her that were kind of disconcerting. He started to notice that, number one, she had been a little dishonest about, or left out some details about how her previous relationships had ended. And it turns out that some of them had ended very contentiously. Mm-hmm. And she'd not been on the planet that long, but she'd had a lot of conflict in her past relationships. Mm-hmm. He also noticed that there was this weird dynamic with her, where she would treat him as just her savior for when she was in love with him. But then at the drop,
Captain Save-A-Ho?
Well,
I use that term. You don't have to use it if you don't want to.
No, I'm fine with it. Two different things we're talking about here. Yeah, there was that white knight, Captain Save-A-Ho mentality that he had. But also, he noticed that he was the good guy until he was not. Like, she would turn on a dime, and then he was the devil. And so she would get very angry at him. She was inconsolable, and she started also to get kind of violent with him. And I don't care what you hear, the statistics say that violence from women, women are every bit as violent as men in relationships.
It's true.
They do it a little differently, but they are just as violent. So anyway, he started to notice these very troubling patterns, and that this relationship was not working. And he, after, I don't know, 15, 16 months, he started to try to extricate himself from the relationship. And he started talking about breaking up and going separate ways. Well, you can imagine she didn't take this very well, because he had become her security and her safety. And so she got very angry. She started getting even more violent when she was angry. And he realized that he had to get out of this relationship. Fortunately, she decided to follow her pattern, which was to get legally contentious about this. Now, mind you, they weren't married. They didn't have kids. They probably weren't even common law married, which differs from one municipality to another. But
Right.
there was no legal contract there. But regardless, she drew him into a legal battle that he had to defend himself from. And so he had to weigh the costs and the benefits of his various options. And it turned out that the cheapest way for him to get rid of her was to liquidate his business. He didn't walk away with nothing, but he had to start over. And the reason I choose this origin story for this book is because it's an illustration that having the wrong woman in your life, you don't have to marry her to have your plans devastated. You don't have to have kids. Just getting her too far into your world before you know her is enough to ruin your plans.
Yeah, so that was actually one of the early passages I highlighted in this book. I was just looking for it as you're wrapping up the origin there. But I've said before in my videos, and almost in the first 10 minutes of me reading the book, you echoed it right away. I mean, there's nothing that can devastate a man's life more than choosing the wrong partner. And I mean, I'm going to use my terms because I know that you're the clinical psychologist, and you're going to use more specific terms that are going to relate to your study and your learning. But guys are dumb. We think with our dicks, and we don't place enough value and enough attention to properly vetting the women that we let into our lives for a whole bunch of reasons, which I'm sure you could go on for hours about. But what I want to do now is, if you can share 3 of your top tips that guys can get a ton of value out of this video. And if they want, guys, I highly recommend grabbing this book. I've gotten so much out of it, the way he's broken things down. But your 3 top tips right now for me, Shawn. You want to start with the first one?
Yeah, I've got a ton of them in there. So if your followers don't read the whole book, at least get these 3 things, because these are really important. The first one is, don't shack up to test the relationship. And there's a couple of reasons this is important. Number one, that advice is out there. It's floating around on the internet that in order to know if a woman is safe to partner with, that you should move in with her and see how things go. The research says that there's a couple of problems with that. Number one, that moving in to test a relationship actually damages the outcome. So shacking up in itself is not a bad thing. If it's part of a larger plan and you two have decided that you're the right thing for each other, and this is just one step in the larger journey, then the living together outside of some agreement doesn't really have any effect on the outcome. But if you're shacking up just to test a relationship and find out how things go, you can almost count on it going poorly. Now, the women and men do this for different reasons. There's a study out of Australia that asked men and women, why did you shack up? And men their answer was typically to test the relationship. Women's answer was typically out of convenience. So, and the most common explanation was, well, it just happened. I don't know how you just happened with somebody. So don't let it just happen to you. Do not shack up to test the relationship.
Right. And, just to add to that a little bit, one of the things I got out of the book is you don't need to live with somebody to get a fairly accurate diagnosis of, bad behaviors that are going to be potential problem areas for you in the future. I mean, you can get that sort of stuff by spending a weekend together at one another's house, or taking a weekend excursion getaway somewhere. It's only a matter of time before any of these bad behaviors that you're talking about in the book, that are signals and signs to guys that she might be a massive nightmare later on down the road. You'll see them. You don't need to live with somebody to see that. I mean, all you'll see when you live with somebody is, hey, do they put away the dishes, or do they leave their laundry on the floor, right?
Exactly. You're not going to get those dynamics. Now, the impulse to test the relationship that guys have is a brilliant impulse, and you should follow that impulse to test the relationship. But you should do it in a different way. You should do it over time, and you should get beyond that honeymoon phase. And the honeymoon phase is not just a figure of speech. It is a series of neurological events where, when we're in that honeymoon phase, we're not seeing each other accurately. We're not even seeing ourselves or the world accurately. So the antidote like what you're saying, give it time and get to that point where things start to normalize for you. And that's when you get a sense of how she responds to the stressors of life and conflict and so forth. And what are her coping skills?
What would you say is a reasonable period of time for that? Any bad signals or signs that you talk about in this book to show up? I mean, is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Like, I know that people can, tend to act, and it's like, you'll be dating the representative and then all of a sudden they'll move in, or you'll get married. And it's like the representative leaves and you're left with a real person.
Right. Yeah. Well, that phrase, the representative. The research says that this honeymoon phase lasts anywhere from 9 to 18 months, and that's where your baseline neurology or neuropsychology, your neurochemistry has deviated from the baseline. And it's hard to pin down, but there have been studies that say people start to come back to normal anywhere between like 9 and 18 months. So my thought is, give it at least a year. You should be in that courtship phase, and you should be getting back to the point where little things are starting to annoy you about them. You're not seeing them as an ideal person. You're seeing them as a real person. And that's kind of when you know that honeymoon phase is over. And then after that, give it time to see what shows up.
Got it. Okay. Point number 2.
Don't slide. Meaning, in my hometown, in my alma mater, actually, where I got my doctorate, there's some researchers that are looking at how people slide into relationships, meaning they unintentionally end up in basically a married state. And guys have to be very careful about this because we think differently than women. And one of the very sweet things about women is that when they decide we're the guy, they kind of want to get things moving, and you can't blame them for that. But we have to be very careful about, don't get the puppy together, don't start going to IKEA and buying furniture, don't have her tampons under your sink unless you are in that committed state. And guys make this really dangerous error where they're in a no man's land between, are they the boyfriend, or the husband, or the fiance, or the life partner? Be very clear. I suggest 3 categories in this book. You are her boyfriend, or you are her fiance / intended, whatever you want to call it, or you are her husband or partner, whatever you want to call it. Be very careful about those in-between states, and be very intentional about moving on to the next phase. Make her earn, just like she should make you earn. Make her earn that status from going from boyfriend to fiance to husband.
Yeah, I tell guys all the time to be intentional about what they do with life and with women and with choices about money and even the people they spend time with. And a lot of guys will sleepwalk through life just kind of going with what societal norms, religion, government, family has always told them to do and be. And it's like, if you open your eyes and you pay attention to these things that start happening, the signals that you talk about in this book, you can avoid a big, big nightmare. So just, when you said slide into a relationship, I thought immediately, slide into something like, slide into the DMs, how people slide into your DMs at Instagram and they start, talking to you behind the scene. It just automatically happens. They kind of like, it's like gravity. They kind of suck up your time with their conscious and unconscious, this and that. And I see it happen to guys all the time. It's like, and then we started living together. I'm like, well, how did that happen? Well, I don't know. It just happened, slowly stuff just kind of moved, started moving into my house, and then her cat was there, and then, she was there full time, and then the dog moved in, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, it's a disaster. It doesn't just happen. It's a series of decisions, and it's a series of small decisions.
Yeah.
You go from getting a puppy to signing a lease together, and then you're essentially a husband. I don't know if you want to be, but you are.
Yeah. And you guys know what my take is on living with somebody. I did a video on, how that ruins things like competition, anxiety, and all that stuff. I'll put a card up in the top right so you can check it out. Third point.
The third point is avoiding self-deception. I think I've got 9 or 10 little bullet points, or actually kind of expanded bullet points in the book about how to avoid fooling yourself about the wrong woman, because guys are very vulnerable to this. We have this nature where we fall in love quicker than women, we get committed quicker than women, and we do commitment a little bit differently. So we have to be very careful about our own psychology, because we have all these mechanisms for fooling ourselves into believing that she is the right woman. So we will do things like avoiding, we'll ignore the common denominator. So if we have a series of broken relationships and there's a pattern there, it's very easy for any human being to say, well, it's everybody else's fault. All of my landlords have been dicks. All of my ex-girlfriends have been terrible. All of my bosses have been unreasonable. Well, if you find yourself saying things like that, then you need to look inward, because there's a good chance that you are the common denominator. And I offer other things like how to recognize and avoid white knighthood or Captain Save-A-Ho, and how to listen to your intuition, because guys have intuition too, but we are not trained to listen to it the way women are. We're kind of discouraged from it. So how to listen to it, and when to, what to do when it starts to show up. Things like ignoring warning from friends and families, and other things that men and women do to sort of deceive themselves about their partner. And the antidote to all this stuff we've already touched on is time, and being very intentional about courtship, so that you can assess, how's her communication, how are her coping skills, how is her mental health. I have a whole section on mental health in the book, because if you're going to be on the dating scene, you need to know what depression and anxiety look like. You need to know what substance abuse looks like. You need to know definitely to know what personality disorders look like. Yeah.
Can we talk about the personality disorders for just a little bit? I wanted to keep it under about 20 minutes, but that's a question that comes up a lot of the time from guys asking me to do videos on like BPD, or how do you spot narcissism and things like that. And I've read books on it, but I'd rather defer to somebody that's an expert, that's clinically trained on it. So can you give us a couple of personality disorders that are pretty obvious to you, but most guys don't notice when they come into you for counseling?
I think one of the ones that's most obvious to somebody who's gone through the trenches and paid their dues like I have is that borderline personality disorder. It's a very difficult one to detect. And even when I started working as a psychologist, I got taken in and didn't detect some people who had this disorder. And the reason it's so hard to detect is that it feels great at first. I mean, these people are charming, they're great in the bedroom, they make you feel like you're just the king of the world, but then things flip, and suddenly you're kind of reeling and going, oh my God, what the hell just happened? So, and there are other personality disorders that are sort of on that high end of the spectrum, like narcissistic personality disorders, that people start off in their relationships great. They're charismatic and they make you feel good, and that makes it very difficult to detect what's really happening. And so I guess my advice is that when you're meeting somebody for the first time and you get this overwhelmingly good feeling from them, you got to slow down and ask. It could be that they're just wonderful people and they're the perfect fit for you, but it could be that there's something else going on that you really need to attend to.
Yeah. One of the things that I've started to track and I've noticed is borderline personality seems to tie into abandonment issues, and these women seem to have a bad relationship with their fathers. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's typically with borderline personality disorder a history of trauma and a lot of times abuse, and there has to be also an internal predisposition for it, because there are plenty of people who go through bad times and don't end up with personality disorders. But yeah, there's a strong correlation between family trauma and horrible childhoods and growing up to have this way of interacting with the world.
Cool. All right. So any final thoughts for people before we wrap up?
Oh, geez. I guess the thing to think about with this book is that it's a very inexpensive insurance policy. Guys, we're good at thinking about risk and how to manage it, but we don't get the training that we should a lot of times from our fathers. Our fathers should be talking to us about this stuff, and we're just kind of discouraged from talking about how to manage this risk. And women, the right relationship can be the best thing that happens to a guy, and the wrong one can be the worst thing that happens to a guy. So, do the insurance. If you don't read it in my book, go out and research what makes good relationships so you don't wind up in court or worse.
Or broke or dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there it is again, A Tactical Guide to Women. It's available on Amazon. I'll link it below in the description. You can grab a copy. I know it just went live today. It's September 1st. I guess I'll release this later on today so everybody can see it immediately and hopefully grab a copy for you. Shawn, I want to thank you for your time. I've really enjoyed reading as much of the book as I have, and I've gotten a ton of value out of it. So thanks for sending it to me. Guys, I hope this is useful to you. A lot of you have asked me how to properly vet women. This is a pretty good guide. I'd highly recommend checking it out. Thanks, Shawn.
Thank you, Rich.
All right. Peace, brothers.